You
All
are
right.
here to rock and roll. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So thanks everyone for attending today. We're very excited to have you, and we're excited to bring kind of two different audiences together. We've been doing these productivity webinars for a couple months now, and we're very excited to have Ross join us today and talk a little bit more about the 80-20 rule. So I'm going to be talking about 80-20 a little bit more from the productivity standpoint, while he'll be talking it from digital marketing and attention. So thanks everyone for joining us. So just a quick introduction about myself. My name is Robert Newcombe. I'm an associate partner at Barrington Consulting and a co-lead of our practice called Barrington OPS. And OPS stands for Operational Performance Services. And we focus on process improvement and increasing productivity for organizations and individuals. So my background is in industrial engineering. I graduated from Dalhousie here in Halifax in 2013 and am a professional engineer now, and also had an opportunity to get my MBA at the Sobey School of Business here in Halifax as well. So since then, I've been doing Lean Six Sigma training, coaching, and projects. So I have my Lean Six Sigma black belt and also a practicing project management professional. And Ross, maybe you want to take a minute to introduce yourself?
Sure, for sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ross Simmonds. I'm the founder of a content marketing agency that works with B2B brands, ranging from everything like Fortune 500 companies all the way down to some of the fastest growing startups in the world. We work with brands in helping them essentially tell their story online to drive meaningful and measurable results. I am an entrepreneur, an investor, a speaker, and a writer. I've been published and have done public speaking all over the world, but truly my biggest passion has to be content marketing and the ability to use content to reach people and drive results. In addition to that, I have a deep obsession with coffee and my family. So those are kind of my three things that have keeping me busy these days: caffeine, family, and of course the good old-fashioned business. So today we're going to be talking about, from my lens, how the 80-20 principle and some of the philosophies that Robert's going to share with you can be applied to your business from a marketing lens, and how to get your story out there. Throughout, if you have any questions, again, drop a comment in the chat. We will have some time towards the end where we can have a bit of a Q&A and some dialogue. So without further ado, I'll pass the mic back over to Rob, who's going to kick us off.
Thank you, Ross. So I guess to get started, we'll give a little bit of a background of the 80-20 rule and where it started. And it started from a man named Vilfredo Pareto, which has a nice ring to it. And he was an Italian engineer in the late 1800s. And he, as an engineer, he also had a garden. And what he noticed is that 20% of the pea pods produced 80% of the peas. So we started thinking about this, 80-20 relationship. And as though he started as an engineer, he really turned into an economist. And he started looking at Italy, his home country, and he realized that 20% of the people owned 80% of the land. And the more that he investigated, the more he saw this 80-20 relationship where 20% of the inputs caused 80% of the outputs or the results. So this really kind of took up his time, and he was really kind of focused on distributions of wealth and economists in seeing this 20-80 rule. But since then, we've seen this and applied in so many different areas, and you can think of your everyday life, and you can probably make this connection or relationship. You might know it intuitively, or you might think back and say, "Oh yeah, no, I can see this now." And so, if you own a small business or if you're an entrepreneur, you probably know that 20% of your customers give you 80% of the revenue. And perhaps 20% of your customers also give you 80% of your headaches. These could be the same customers that are bringing in your revenue, or maybe not at all. You may also see that 20% of your clothes or 20% of your closet or wardrobe, you wear 80% of the time. I posted this on LinkedIn earlier this morning. My wife said, "Was that a shot at me?" And I said, "No, this is pretty common. This is a lot of people." And maybe from working from home, it's even a bigger range. Maybe you're wearing 10% of your clothes 90% of the time because you've taken close, or you're really kind of taken in the comfortable clothing. And we've seen this kind of relationship and trend kind of go across all different types of industries. And there's even an 80-20 diet where it's acceptable to have 20% of your calories be bad food and 80% of your calories be good food and good calories. So not really an accurate way to portray the 80-20 principle, because it's not talking about inputs and outputs, but you can see that these two numbers are very symbolic, and it's really kind of, it's something that people have heard of and can relate to. So this is a Pareto chart or a Pareto graph. So folks that know that, it's similar to a bar chart or histogram, except all of your it's organized by largest to smallest. So this is reported coronavirus cases by country. This is information up to date as of yesterday, or end of day Monday, I believe. So you can see the 80-20 rule in action here. On the far left, we have America. They're leading the way as far as reported coronavirus cases. And then we have the rest of the countries. So this is looking at the top 50 countries. So blue would be the count. You'll see on the y-axis there up to 1.4 million. And if we're saying, okay, the 20/80 rule, 20% of the inputs, that would be 10 of 50 countries. So those are the countries circled in the box there. And then in the orange, this is cumulative. So this is adding all of those blue bars up as you go along from left to right, based on the percentages on the right-hand side. So we have 20% of the countries roughly account for 80% of the reported cases. So that's Pareto in a nutshell. And from a productivity lens, Pareto's rule, or the 80-20 rule, and Parkinson's law work very well together. And this is a lesser known law as it comes to Pareto's very well known. Parkinson's law, probably not a lot of people have heard about it. And what it states is work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. So this came from a man named Cyril Northcote Parkinson, and he wrote an article or an essay in The Economist all the way back in 1955. So he did a lot of work and had a lot of experience with the British civil service. And what he noted is the British Empire in this time was actually shrinking and decreasing. So the amount of effort from bureaucracy and public sector should decrease with the size, but it was increasing year to year. It was actually increasing by 5 or 7%. And he didn't know why that was. So when he looked at it, there was kind of two main forces. One was an official wants to multiply subordinates, not rivals. So they want to grow and they want to have people under them to help. And simply officials make work for each other. So if you have enough people involved, they're going to find a way to keep busy, whether or not there's work to be done or not. So as your team grows, as your organization grows, whether you have that work or not, people are going to fill their time. So how do you best make use and value your time? So you're actually adding value to your customers. And that's where we want to look at it from a productivity lens. So, and when we say productivity, we actually mean effectiveness too. It's not just producing outputs. It's how do you make sure you're doing the right things as well as doing those efficiently. So another way to look at Parkinson's law is a task will swell in perceived importance and complexity in relation to the time allotted for its completion. So basically, if you have a deadline that's set further out, you're going to make it seem more complicated and more important than it might actually be. So for an example, it could be a take-home exam. If you have an exam that's a 3-hour time slot, and it's the exam you're going to take tomorrow or the end of the week, you only have so much time to work on it. But if you have a take-home exam that's not due for another week, you're going to put a lot more time into that because it's going to seem more important and it's going to seem more complex, because if the professor's giving me this much time, I need to put a certain amount of time into it. So it's going to seem a lot more either important or complex than maybe it actually is. So we see these in other examples too. Development and construction projects, for example. If you have a long timeline and not a lot of work to fill that time, people are going to make it overly complex. They're going to start re-guessing and reconfiguring things, or asking so many different people, and they're going to put their inputs in, and it's going to change so much that it's adding more complexity to the work. Same with proposal writing and deadlines. If I have a proposal that's due Friday. I only have 48 hours or so to get that done. I'm only going to put so much work into it. And I figure they're only going to expect so much because it's due in a couple days, versus a proposal that's due at the end of the month. Oh, wow, they need 3 weeks for us to work on this. They must be expecting a lot of information. So you can see how time and importance, the relationship there. Interestingly enough, you can see it working the opposite way. So in the transition to working from home around March 15th, 16th, you see a lot of organizations, both private and public sector, we can't allow all of our employees to work from home. It's just not plausible. We don't have the technology. We don't have the processes set in place. We don't trust our employees to be productive from home. And then sure enough, a pandemic comes along and we don't have that much time to react, and it gets done. So you can see how it works in both scenarios. And an interesting thing that I saw a couple weekends ago is I went to Home Depot and I was actually picking up rat traps for my rental property. And there were literally 40 people standing in line, and that line was not moving. And I was thinking, there's no way people would be waiting in line 3 months ago, because their time is more important. They wouldn't be waiting in line for an hour, 2 hours to just walk into Home Depot. But it turns out that people value their time less, perhaps because they don't have other things to do. So they're sufficient in waiting in line for that to happen. So how much time do you have versus what you need to do? That would be Parkinson's law. So what we can do with that original law is it states work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. At the same time, we can say work will shrink so as to fit the time available for its completion. So what we can do is we can use Pareto's rule and Parkinson's law to help improve and increase our productivity. So let's say you have 3 dedicated days to work on a project. So they roughly 20 hours of work, and you are going to spread your time out across the 20 hours to get that work done. So perhaps that first hour, very productive, high effort, you're motivated. And then maybe the next few hours, the rest of the day, you say, you know what, it's not due to the end of the week. I can just kind of chip away at it. It's not that important. And I will focus on it tomorrow. I will just kind of pick away at the easy things. Then you might have a little bit more productivity the day after. You might be doing high value activities. And then you're like, I'm making good progress. I'm going to take the rest of the day off. Or I'm going to fiddle with this one paragraph or this one page or this one piece because I know I have time to finish the rest. So that is, 20 hours, that initial time window, you're putting time into it. You're not putting time to anything else, and it's just spread across. So where we can use Pareto's rule is say, well, if we know 20% of the activities can cause 80% of the results, let's reduce our time window to 20%. So now instead of 20 hours, we have 4 hours, and we can still get 80% of those results. So it's taking 20% of the time that we initially had allocated, but still getting 80% of the results. So that's where these two can work together. But it's important to ask yourself, when is 80% results okay? Because anyone that's run a project knows that last 20%, that final push is always the hardest. And it might be an 80-20 rule there, where it's going to take 80% of the time or the effort to get that last 20% done. So asking yourself, when is it okay to get 80% results? Because you can dramatically decrease the amount of time spent on those activities. So as far as Pareto's rule goes, we want to limit tasks to the important to shorten work time. But at the same time, with Parkinson's law, we can do the exact same thing, except we shorten work time to limit tasks to the important. So look at tasks, limit the tasks, or we can limit the amount of time to work. They're both accomplishing the same thing as saying, how do we focus on the most important and still get the results at the end? So Ross, this is where I'll hand it back to you. Ross, I think you might be on mute.
There we go.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Awesome.
Yes. All right.
Great.
My turn.
I was just saying, perfect. I was just saying, thanks so much for that. It was great to see some folks responding even to a poll I put up to kind of gauge whether or not folks had heard of the 80-20 principle or Pareto's or Parkinson's law. And there was definitely a lot of people who had never heard of Parkinson's or were familiar with it. So thanks for sharing that. Folks, before I jump in, I do unfortunately have a confession to make. And this is something that has definitely been with me for a very long time. It's something that has influenced my time at events, my time at conferences, my time going to university a few years ago. It seems like decades ago now, but it is something that has impacted me through my entire career. It's something that in these types of times is actually kind of a benefit. And the reason why is because this impacts me primarily when I go to things like networking events. And I haven't had to go to a networking event in person for a very long time because of the quarantine. So that is one benefit of all of this chaos. And I think hopefully some of you will be able to see a little bit of similarity in this in yourself. But whenever I go to these events, as much as I love networking, as much as I love meeting people and shaking hands, while that might not be possible in the future, as much as I love these events, I do struggle with one simple element. Is the fact that I'm a wanderer. And when I say wanderer, I'm not talking about the fact that when I was a kid, I got lost at the local fair and I grabbed the hand of a complete stranger and I went missing for like probably 2 hours. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm a wanderer as it relates to information. For example, last year I was at this event and I love talking about marketing. I go to a lot of marketing events and technology events. And I was talking to a gentleman about the rise of vertical video. And I love this stuff, right? Like I can geek out for years about how back in the 90s, if you uploaded a vertical video to the internet, everyone would say this is bad. Like you shouldn't have done it this way. It has to be horizontal. But with the rise of TikTok and Snapchat, vertical video is kind of embraced. Like we love it. I was fully engaged in this conversation until probably 5 minutes in when my brain started to wander. It started to wander to a conversation that was happening probably about 8 feet away from me. Two people were having a debate that completely captured my attention, captured my mind, and I completely blanked out on the gentleman that was standing in front of me, and I was fully immersed in a conversation about butter. Yes, butter. I kid you not. There was a discussion about butter and my mind completely shifted to focus on this. I was so engaged in this. He was talking to me and it was kind of like in Charlie Brown, if any of you remember, when the mom was talking to kids and it just sounded like wah, 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 wah. That's what it felt like was coming out of this gentleman's mouth because I couldn't hear anything but the debate between whether or not butter should be kept in the counter or in the fridge. And I am curious, so I'm going to throw it out to you folks. Where do you keep your butter? Do you keep it on the counter or do you keep it in the fridge? Drop a quick comment in the chat and just let me know because I want to know what your thoughts are on this debate. We can have a discussion later around what the right answer is. But this conversation and this debate completely took my attention away from a conversation about marketing. That's what it's all about when it comes to kind of being a wanderer, for me anyways. What's going on here? My screen looks like, there we go. So sorry about that. My mind completely was going to this conversation about butter. It was completely enthralled into this dialogue and this discussion. And the reason why is, again, because my mind is a wanderer. And I got upset by this because I was at this event with my wife. We both were there in attendance. And when she came back to join me for this conversation, I actually introduced her as my butter half. Now, this was embarrassing because, I mean, who says that? Who says butter half? Like a complete slip of the tongue. But I went back to my hotel and I had to ask myself, like, what happened in my brain that resulted in this? And it turns out that scientists have actually been studying this phenomenon for quite some time. It's called the cocktail party effect. Now look it up, research it yourself, but it's actually a superpower that all of us have. It's the ability to, amongst chaos, if you're ever at an event, if you're at a wedding, if you're at a networking event, if you're sitting at a table, if you're at a lunchroom with your colleagues, we have the ability to actually isolate a single stream of sound and kind of break it out amongst the chaos. So if we're in a room where there's tons and tons of noise happening around us, we can isolate, let's say 20% of the sounds that we actually care about and focus on that. Unfortunately, though, the reality is when it comes to the internet, things don't work that way, right? Like while in person, at networking events, at kitchen parties, at local events, etc., we have the ability to isolate that sound and be laser focused with our attention On the internet, it's very difficult. It's very difficult because the internet is the loudest cocktail party ever. When you open up your mobile phone and you log in for the first time, when you open up Twitter, you open up LinkedIn, you open up your inbox even, it can feel overwhelming. And the reason why is because it's never been easier to create content. It is noisier than ever before. All of the tweets, all of the posts, all of the shares, it can very easily feel like every time you open up your computer, it is like drinking out of a fire hydrant because it's just overwhelming. The amount of content coming our way is so significant, right? That is the reality of the world that we live in today. And I have to say, it's kind of my fault. It's anyone who is a marketer's fault. Anyone who has been preaching at the top of their lungs for the last few years that content is king, create more content, is a part of the reason why it's so overwhelming today to just log in online. Because brands have listened, right? Brands have listened to this idea that we need to create more content, that you need to write more blog posts, you need to create more landing pages, you need to create more white papers, send out more tweets, put up more Facebook posts. The world has listened because we have said that for so many years. And I get it. It truly does make sense to create more content. We live in a world where everyone is connected online. And right now, during these times, more people are at home on their devices looking to connect with content. So if you can create that content and you can influence the way people are thinking, that you can put stories in front of them that resonate, of course, now is a great time to create content. But with this comes more competition, right? Every single individual listening to this right now is probably within an arm's reach of multiple devices. I guarantee, just in the chat, let me know how many people right now can access both a phone and like a laptop of some sort within arm's reach right now. Just wondering in the chat, just say, I can, let me know. The reality is, this is the truth 24/7. Right? Like we are connected to our devices are becoming one with us as humans. And with that, we have the ability to create content. Every text message, every tweet, every Facebook post, that is contributing to the content that people are able to see, that people are competing, and brands, organizations, associations, nonprofits, etc. We all are competing for attention because of this world where there's tons of content. And sites like Google, as much as they have kind of acted as an ally in helping us tell our stories, they're actually making our lives a little bit harder. Let me explain. In the past, you could create a landing page on your website, you could create some content on your website, and Google would send people to your website so you could build a stronger connection. If you're an organization and you wanted to show one product versus the other, and let's say you have a photography company and you're writing reviews on two different cameras, in the past, Google would send those people to your website and you would be able to capture their attention, get their emails, sell to them, maybe make a transaction on your site, sell them the camera, etc. But today, Google is actually taking that information from your site and they're placing it directly in the search engine results page. The same thing is happening right now amidst coronavirus and COVID-19. If you go to Google and you type in coronavirus cases in Canada or in Sweden or US, wherever, guess where that data is showing up? You're no longer being sent directly to a government website. You're not being sent to your government's landing page or the data that they've published. Instead, Google is taking that data from sources like Wikipedia, and they are placing that information directly in the search engine results page. Again, this is the world that we live in today. Google is not making our lives easier to actually be able to get our content in front of the audience that we're trying to reach. They are trying to connect with your audience on their own behalf and have that relationship for themselves. Whether it's books, let's say that you run a blog about ketosis and you're trying to help people take on a more keto-friendly diet. You wrote a blog post that says the 20 books that you need to read about going keto. Google's taking that content and they're placing it directly in the search. If you're creating a content blog around the best foods for your skin health, guess what? Google's taking content as well, and they're placing it directly in the search engine results page as well. Tomato, salmon, green tea, garlic, ag as food. We're still working on the natural language thing, but they're trying, right? Like they're trying to take all of that information and place it directly in the search engine results page so you don't necessarily have the ability to reach these people. If I'm trying to improve my skin health, I get the answer directly on Google. I don't need to click on a link to learn any more, right? Google has become a destination. Google is trying to become a place where they can give all of the information to people and people can get the information here. This is resulting in it becoming more and more challenging to win at the game of digital marketing and social media. When you're trying to get your stories out there, when you're trying to get your content out there, it is becoming more and more difficult. And this is resulting in people putting in more and more time just frantically trying to figure out, what can I do? How can I create something that's going to stand out? How can I do something that's going to get the message in front of our audience? And the reality is, folks, yes, it is going to be difficult. And I believe that by embracing the principles that Robert already talked about, you'll have a better likelihood and a better shot at actually increasing your ability to be productive and increasing your likelihood of creating content assets that are going to work for you. And I'm going to share with you some techniques and strategies to do exactly that. One of the other examples of this is with social media. So the number of Facebook posts that have been created quarter after quarter, month after month, year after year continues to rise, right? This is the reality of what happens when everyone is creating more content. But as a result of all of this, while we are creating more content, while brands are creating more content, while marketers are telling you to create more content, Facebook is actually seeing a decrease in the amount of interactions happening on this content year after year, quarter after quarter. Why? Because Facebook has played what I believe is the best bait and switch in business history, which is they convinced all of us to pay to get likes on our page, to get people to show that they like us. And now if we want to reach those who like us, we actually have to pay to reach them. So Facebook is essentially now created a landscape where just to reach the people who liked you, you actually have to pay to play, which ultimately allows them to increase their shareholder value, etc. And that's all they really care about. So again, this is why more than ever before, when you look at 100% of the efforts that you are doing on a regular basis with your marketing stack, whether it's using Facebook, whether it's using Google, whether it's using YouTube, you name it, it's important that you look at the activities that are actually going to drive the most results. This is why it's important to reverse engineer and study the content that you're creating. It's important that you study and analyze the stories that you're putting out there, the messages you're putting out there, and really try to uncover what are the best pieces of content, what are the best stories, what are the best press releases, what are the best Facebook updates, best tweets, whatever it may be. What is the best content that we've put out there in the last 6 months, and use the insights around that best 20% to guide the strategy and the techniques that you're using in the future. Right? When you start to ask yourself, how can we get more results from our content and our digital channels? It really starts by understanding what you have done to date and using that from a 80-20 perspective to understand what you should be doing tomorrow. Look at the top content on your site, right? Like this is a screenshot of the actual traffic that the Foundation Inc., our company, generated over the last few months. And you can see clearly that more than 60%, even 80% of our traffic is coming from just 2 or 3 blog posts, right? So the vast majority of the results are coming from a very small sample of our content. And this is something that we consistently see with clients. It's something that we consistently see across benchmarking studies that we've done across a wide variety of sectors. The vast majority of your traffic, the vast majority of your results only come from a small portion of the content that you've developed. And this is the reality that is impacting why it's so important for you to look at the top content that you've developed, look at the best assets you've put out there, and use it to inspire the content you develop in the future. For most people, 80% of your traffic comes from 20% of your sources, right? But we continuously invest in channels, in opportunities, in stories, and ideas that don't necessarily result in the return. This is why doing audits of your existing materials, your existing content, your existing stories is so important, right? Similarly on Twitter, right? Even just from a personal level, I like to look at, okay, what are the top tweets? What are the top posts that I've shared in the last 48 hours, in the last 60 days, and use that to gain insight into what type of content should I be putting out there in the future, right? So if I can see, okay, this is my top tweet for the month of May. It was able to get 95 likes. It had some great reach. What can I do in my strategy to really start to share more content like this? How can I create content that's more aligned with this type of story, right? Those are the types of things that you want to be looking at. View everything that you develop from a marketing lens kind of like an asset portfolio, right? I think this is key. You want to look at it like an asset portfolio where every single asset that you invest in, which is an investment in either time or resources in terms of money, every single asset that you develop, every asset that you publish is contributing to your asset portfolio, right? And you want to ensure that when things do get rocky, that your asset portfolio is not going to be very shaky. You want to ensure that when you do make these investments in creating blog posts or creating a landing page, creating tweets, webinars, etc., when you are investing in these assets, that you are essentially building yourself up with a bit of a diversified portfolio that can weather the storm. Especially when you think about the impact that things like coronavirus and COVID-19 have had on organizations around the world, right? When you look back at 2008 Foundation, we did this study and analysis of search trends across a wide variety of industries and a wide variety of terms. And what we found was that while organizations often had to scale back on their budgets and organizations went out of business during 2008 and through 2009 when the financial crisis hit, search trends continued. So people continued to go to Google and look for things like fitness, Facebook, softwares, media, and various brands. People continue to look for those things. People are still looking for answers. So while it is very easy to say we need to just stop creating things right now, people are still looking for things. And if you can create things that answer their questions, you're going to have the ability to ride the wave that may not even have become essentially full-fledged as bad as things could get yet, right? Like you have an opportunity to create content assets that can ultimately ride any storm that we may see. We also look back at like the paid implications back in 2008 with the financial crisis. And what we found was that it took more than 5 years for us to get back to a level of 2008 with paid media. And again, this is because when things got bad, a lot of organizations, a lot of brands started to scale back on their PPC efforts. A lot of brands started to scale back on newspaper, on out of home, on radio, on TV advertising. And it took more than 5 years for it to get back to normal with their efforts. This is a clear sign that when you look at the efforts that you're investing in, you want to make sure that they're diverse and that you can ensure that even if something does happen, you can rely on content to kind of rank and ensure that you're able to capture some results, that you can rely on social media, that you can rely on a channel that you know can work for you, even if things do get a little bit rocky and you have to adjust your approach. So it starts by really going internal, right? Like you need to look at internally, where are we getting the vast majority of our results from? What channels are we using to drive these results? And then it's time to start going external, where you start to look at the behaviors and the content that people are consuming, look at the stories that your audience is consuming. For example, let's say that you're trying to help people be more productive. You're going to go to Google and you're going to type in how to improve productivity, and then you're going to see what type of content is showing up there. Right? That phrase itself, how to improve productivity, is getting 1,300 people searching for it a month. That's a lot of people trying to be productive. So what you have the opportunity to do is to create content that may show up in Google. And the way that you can do that is to start clicking on these various links and start to reverse engineer what they were able to do to show up. What type of content did they include in their article? How was it formatted? What was the story? Do they have links to different sources? Are they showing journals? Are they referencing academia? Like, what is the approach that they're taking with their content? And use that to inspire your own approach as well. You want to identify gaps in what you have created and then make it better, right? If 80% of your traffic is coming from 20% of your results, look at that 20% of the content that you've developed, the stories that you've told, the ads that you've put out there, the videos you've published, and try to figure out what you can do to make those content assets better. And you constantly are doing this model over and over again to continuously improve your ability to capture a bigger audience. In addition, you want to go into communities. You want to go into the communities where your audience is spending time and start to look at the top content within those communities. If you go into a subreddit like tech and that's your audience, you're going to sort the content by top posts and start to reverse engineer what content resonated with people in this community. And again, what you'll see is that 20% of the most engaging content within this community probably came from a small percentage of the content that was there. And you can use this to inspire the content that you're developing as well. Similarly, you go to a site like YouTube and you look at, okay, how to be productive. You type in a keyword that is relevant to your audience, and then you start to look at the various videos that show up at the top and use that for inspiration around, okay, how can we create content like this? What stories can we tell that are in this lane? And what tips can we get around the formatting, their way of introducing the concepts? How can we get a sense around how they're writing their descriptions, what keywords they're using? All of this stuff should inform how you can take that 20% that has been successful within your organization and make it more successful in the future. Similarly, you can go to publications, right? Like you can look at publications that organizations that you're trying to reach or people that you're trying to reach are spending a lot of time on. And then again, reverse engineer how the best content was able to rise up and what differentiated it from the rest. Again, it's all about identifying gaps in what you have and figure out ways to make it better. For example, one great example of a company that does this really well is Investopedia. They have developed a glossary on their website where they have just a bunch of definitions. They have definitions for a variety of different terms on finance, on business, etc. And if you're an organization that is trying to essentially start to drive more traffic, you can use this as inspiration. Right? Like you're reverse engineering a company that was successful at targeting people with definitions on a new phrase, etc. And you can start to reverse engineer what they did to make this work. And what you'll find is that tons of other companies have leveraged the same strategy. A company called Moz is doing the same thing, but they're doing it in the SEO lens. A company called Salesforce is doing it in their CRM and sales space, where they're creating definitions for various phrases. So you think about your space and you start to ask yourself, if they are able to generate 80% of their traffic to these definitions, is that an opportunity that we can leverage as well, where we start to create definitions for our industry? That was it that essentially led Foundation down a path of creating what we call the B2B Learning Center. And now we have definitions across a handful of B2B and marketing terms. And this section of our website is doing 80% of our traffic. And again, it was all because we reverse engineered what was happening and working for other brands and applied that to our own approach. Now, once you've created all of this, you have to still do something with it. You can't just press publish and hope that everyone will find you. You have to distribute your content, especially when people are creating more content than ever before. It's more important than ever before that you also distribute that content. And what I always advise is that you spend as much time distributing your content as you do creating it. It's very easy to press publish on a new piece of content and say, we've done our job, it is over. No, that's when the life cycle of your assets begin. We've put together a free checklist. If anyone wants to check it out, just go to rossimmonds.com/distropack with over 100 different ways that you can distribute your content across different channels. We don't have time today to dive into the nitty-gritty of all the different ways that you can distribute your content, but check out this free resource. It's completely free to download, and I think you'll find a lot of value in it. But this is the essence of why content distribution is so important, folks. The life cycle of your content doesn't begin or doesn't end when you press publish, it just begins, right? And I think far too often organizations assume that when they press publish, the world will react, the world will respond, and that's enough. No, you need to be aggressive at spreading that story and distributing that story to the people who you want to reach. Otherwise, you're going to constantly be pressing publish and hoping rather than pressing publish and intentionally driving results for your organization. These are the fundamentals. You want to discover your audience, create great content, and then distribute it consistently. And if you're able to do that, you will be successful. Thank you so much for taking the time, folks. I want to just wrap this up with a few quick insights. First and foremost, the fact that you made some time today clearly demonstrates that you're willing and interested in laying bricks that you're going to need tomorrow. That is the key, right? Like during these times, it's important that you are constantly investing in yourself. So my hat's off to all of you for taking that time to do it, but continue to make that investment. Continue to invest in your education. And at the end of this whole thing, when you ask yourself if it was worth it, you'll say you better believe it. Thank you all for listening. Let's jump into the Q&A. And if you have any questions, by all means, drop them in the chat. Myself and Robert would be happy to continue the dialogue.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ross. Very, very informative. A lot of good feedback there, especially in the chat. I did link to your distro pack
Awesome.
link there in the chat.
Appreciate it.
If anyone wants to click that, they can check it out. I also was interested in the poll as well as how many devices are in arm's reach. Yeah. 2/3, 3+.
Nice. That's amazing.
Not just one,
That's amazing.
not just two.
That's
a lot of people have more than 3. So
that's awesome. I do want to share one insight. So folks, the butter, if you are in Canada, belongs on the counter. But if you are outside and you're in a hot climate, then definitely feel free to keep the butter in the fridge. So that's kind of my hypothesis. But yes, let's jump into some of the questions. I'm seeing a handful fly in. So Robert, I'll ask you this one. This one looks like it's tailored to you. What if 80% of results is not okay? How can I determine the 20% of my activities that give me 80% of my results? Would you say applying the 80-20 rule further has the tendency to be cyclically influenced by the 80-20 principle?
That's a mouthful right there.
It is.
Let's see if I can break that down a little bit. So I think the 80-20 rule, if 80% of your results sometimes isn't going to cut it. So it's not as simple as saying, okay, I'm going to cut my time down into 1/5. I'm going to do those most important things. I'm 80% of the way there. Boom. Whether it's sending off to a client, a customer, posting on social media, whatever it might be, you have to take everything in context. So it's a great way of thinking. So if you can say, okay, if I need to start on the first 20% of the activities, how am I going to get 80% of the way there? And then kind of checking and say, okay, what can I do now? Can I send it along internally? Is it something that needs collaboration? And then you can kind of work on it from there, because chances are the more time you spend on it after that is just going to be rework, and people are going to edit, and it's not going to add as much value. So bringing people in earlier, doing that communication, that collaboration piece, it's really about understanding your end goal and your end objective. Because if it's something finalized and polished, you might need to put in that extra effort, but having different check-in points can be helpful too.
That's great. I like it. No, that's a good response. So then we have let's see.
So Ross, maybe.
I see one here. What if you're just starting out in your digital marketing strategy and you're trying to determine where to put your effort in terms of content and channels, and you have nothing to re-engineer? How do you determine where to put your efforts so you are diversified? Great question. So I think this is where external diversification or external reverse engineering is possible. So it's very likely that someone somewhere in the world has created content or has developed stories and social media posts, etc., that is trying to connect with the audience that you're trying to build a relationship with. And what you can do is you can use them as your guiding posts to figure out what you should develop. So you can look at the best in class, the organizations that are doing an amazing job in your space at connecting with your audience, and start to reverse engineer the success that they've had to influence the content and the stories that you should tell in the future. So that's where I would start with it. And I would also challenge folks to remember, it's not only about looking at the organizations and the brands and the stories that you would compete with directly. It's also looking at people who are telling great stories in general. You can get inspiration from anywhere. You just have to be willing to get outside of your own little industry and world a little bit and take inspiration from other folks as well.
Yeah, and to build on that, Ross, I really like what you were talking about in your presentation. It's looking internally, and it's also building on your strengths. That 20%, right. What are you really good at, and focusing and honing in on that. And the other 80%, maybe that's more of experimentation. You try with that later, and I think that it really connects.
Yeah, no, I think experimentation is key as well. Like, that's a great comment, Robert. I think across everything, whether we're talking about how to be productive with your internal processes, whether it's talking about your marketing efforts, experimentation is key, right? And I think if you think about it, like 70% of the things that you do on a day-to-day basis can be low risk and may not have a lot of high risk elements to it. And you can keep it that way. But maybe you take a challenge where the rest of that, maybe 20% is medium risk and 10% is high risk. And you start to have a culture that embraces a little bit more experimentation. And once you are able to uncover insights before your competition, it's going to give you a competitive edge.
And I find it also adds a little bit of element of fun to it too.
Yeah.
You know, keeps you engaged if you're, especially this environment now where everyone's working from home, it's easy to get burnt out. If you add a little bit of fun and experimentation to it, it can help kind of motivate and engage.
Exactly, for sure. So there's another question here. What's the best first step for brands investing in content? So great question. I think the best first step is, again, auditing what you've done today and understanding what you actually have done really well. And once you've done that, once you have looked at your existing assets, the next step is to look at your existing resources. And you want to think about, is the content strategy and the ideas that you want to develop actually within your circle of competence? And I think a lot of times we make the mistake of actually trying to do things that are not within our circle of competence, and we fail. And what I think is important is that you become very self-aware with the things that you can excel at and the things that you cannot do really well. And you lean into those things that you can do well. Lean into the things that you know that your organization is built to deliver to people, and embrace that more than anything. So once you've done that and you have a clear understanding of your existing situation, that's when the next step is really just to get committed to creating. And I think early on, when you were talking about the 80-20 model around productivity, a light bulb went off around the importance of making time in your calendar and in your team's calendar to actually create, right? Like, you want to have that time consistently blocked off. And because at the end of the day, it's an investment, and there's only two things that you can invest. You can invest money or you can invest time. And if you are able to block off that time and you are able to ensure that you're spending time creating, then it's going to have a long-term benefit for your company.
You're speaking to my soul, Ross. That whole time management, blocking things in your calendar, that's something that I'm really passionate about, if that's even the right term to use.
Yeah, it's so key. Yeah, no, it's so important.
So I get one here. Would you say applying the 80-20 rule further has the tendency to be cyclically influenced by the 80-20 principle? So what I gather from that is it kind of a bit of a cycle? And I say yes. As soon as you start going deep into the 80-20, if you look at that 20%, then you can start breaking that down 80-20 again, and then 80-20 again, then 80-20 again. And you'll come away with this kind of, less than 20%, the 4%, or even the less than 1%, that's really going to drive as much results as possible. So it is something that you can even dig down a little bit deeper, depending on what level you start at. So it can be a bit of a vicious cycle, a dangerous cycle, if you are just looking solely at productivity and you only want to spend minutes on something. Maybe it's the 4-hour work week and you're trying to drive as much as you can. But it can be driven down even further.
For sure. There's another great question here. Any specific areas where you apply 80-20 to project management? And I think, Robert, it'd be great if you could speak to that one a bit. Yeah.
So as far as project management, I guess it's if you're a project manager, what roles or what activities are you going to have that's going to have the most direct impact? So and I think of it something as a leader as well. If you're doing something, whether it's creating a deliverable or a status report, whatever it might be, is it having the most effect, or can you best delegate to someone else and you're spending a lot less time on it, but it's still getting done and it's still having the large amount of results? So it's looking at leveraging the team and leveraging all of the resources within a project, and how can you spend a little effort as possible and still maximize your results. So it's kind of that getting that full scope of everything involved in the project.
Great. Awesome. I see another question about tools that are valuable for uncovering content ideas that are worth chasing or creating. So I love this question. There's a lot of them out there. Some of my favorites include Moz, which is a SEO tool. There's another great tool called BuzzSumo that is great. And you can also leverage a tool called Ahrefs, Ahrefs. All of those are great tools to leverage, but I think the best tool that anyone can use is truly just good old-fashioned genuine curiosity. Open up a Google Doc and just start sharing content that you will come across from around the web that you like. And what you'll start to find the longer and longer you do this is that you'll start to be able to see trends around what type of content resonates with you and use that for inspiration around the type of content that you develop. I think curiosity is the #1 tool that you can embrace if you are going to be successful at content creation. So be curious, ask questions, and then go out and try to figure out the answer to that question and press publish on assets that answer it for you.
So last one, I guess this is for either of us, Ross, and maybe I'll take the first shot at it.
Okay.
How do you make time for content marketing? And I think from a productivity or process side of things, you have to block it out in your calendar. You have to make it a priority, and you have to dedicate that time, whether it's on a weekly basis. And maybe Ross, you can speak a little bit more to that, how often, but put it in your calendar, and you have to make it a priority. And if something else comes up, you have to be strict. You have to say no to all these other things that come up in order to make it that priority.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. So probably 4 years ago, I started a thing called Wired In Wednesdays. And Wired In Wednesdays was a day in my calendar every single week where I would get wired in, which just means I put in my headphones. I don't accept any meetings. I don't accept any calls or anything like that. I just get wired in and I create content. And that has done wonders for my company, myself, to be more productive and to be more efficient and intentional at creating content. It's something that we've actually embraced to kind of assist our clients in doing, in creating a culture that embraces content. And I think by just embracing the idea of having dedicated days for your team to develop content or distribute content is a key part of this, folks. If you can't have a full day, completely understand, but maybe you have to block off an hour a day for a month or two. Right? Like you block off that time to create. And if you can embrace your calendar, you'll be able to be successful. There's an acronym that has been thrown around for years around cash rules everything around me. I believe that calendars rule everything around me. If you do not embrace your calendar, then you will let your day run you rather than you run your day. And it is so important that you embrace your calendar day in and day out to ensure that 24/7, 365 days a year, you're actually able to embrace the things that matter to you.
Yeah, use the calendar as your guide, not your inbox.
I love it.
Everything coming in your email, those are other people's priorities. The calendar is your own priority. So that's how you can really stay focused and stay productive. Exactly.
Awesome. So I think that's it for questions. Thanks, everyone. I'll let you wrap it up, Robert. But for folks who want to stay connected with me, by all means, connect on LinkedIn. You can also follow me on Twitter at @thecoolestcool. I created my Twitter handle in university, so don't judge. But I would love to connect with all of you. So by all means, give me a search and let's stay in touch and be well.
Yeah, for me, connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search Robert Newcombe. Not active on Twitter. I did create it in university and haven't followed it. But and for anyone else that wants to learn more, we will be posting this webinar recording. That link will be sent out tomorrow, and we're hoping to be able to download and post on YouTube. But for now, it'll be on a webinar jam link. And again, if any questions at all, you can feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or email, and we're going to try to continue posting these productivity webinars on a weekly basis. So if we get good positive feedback, please let both of us know, and maybe it's something that we can do again in the future.
Definitely.
All right. Thank you, Ross. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Have a great day.